It's our mission to give IT pros a break. So, here it is. We wish it was longer, but to keep saving IT pros time and money, we only paid for a 30-second ad. From racks and PDUs to backup power, Eaton and Trip Light have joined forces to bring more sanity to your day every day. Visit eaton.com/audio today.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, we are getting really, really close to the end of 2022. It's been a great year.
Yeah, it has. And the way we're going to kind of do this one, because this is the annual predictions show, and historically, and I'll say for everyone out there, if you haven't listened and haven't hit a prediction show, buckle up. This one's going to be a long one.
Yeah,
this is usually the longest show we do.
Year-end wrap-up, predictions, a little bit of rambling, and it's always intended for those of you that are doing some family travel and you just need to pop the earbuds in and zone out for a while. So yeah, these sometimes run 45 minutes-ish, something like that.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes this year. So we are going to skip Cloud News of the Week, the sort of first segment. We're going to do a little bit of recap of the show. And then after the break, we will cover kind of the year that was in 2022, some commentary on that. And then the predictions, predictions that are 100%, will be wrong at some point in the future. So, so it was a good year. We are moving into 2023. This will be, we're crossing our 12th year of doing this stuff. Can you believe that, man? Yeah. Our kids were really little when we started, and we all got together yesterday, and the kids are all big now.
Yeah, and like the kids all drove themselves to hang out. And I still remember. I mean, I don't even know when it was. It was probably in the first year. I think we actually had them on the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, somewhere in there, somewhere in the archives, there's some little kid voices from our daughters. So yeah, so that was cool. We went over 650 shows. Well, our 700th show will be in March. We already got that one mapped out. So we make a lot of shows. We do a lot of shows. We also, we try and throw some numbers out here in the beginning. We're right at about 20% growth. Last year, I think we did about 16% year-over-year growth. This year, even more. So, we say it all the time, but we can't thank you all enough for telling a friend, giving us ratings on iTunes, telling a friend. Hopefully we continue to make stuff you guys like, but 20% growth is a lot in year 12. And it was the very first year that we ever went over 2 million listens in a year. So, that's a big number, and it's kind of hard to believe. I went back and looked. I did a little bit of math. There were some numbers I wish I had this year that I forgot to get, but I think if you added up the first 5 years that we did the show, maybe 5.5 years, we didn't get to 2 million listens, and then 2 million in this year. And I think we did about 8.5 or 900,000 last year. So, it's been a crazy ride.
Yeah, it sure has been, and it's also interesting to see pre-pandemic levels versus now, and also going to 2 shows a week versus the old days we were only doing 1 show a week, and those things, and we've kind of figured that out and worked our ways through of like, when do folks like to listen? How much do they like to listen? I mean, we don't want to be dropping shows in and then stressing everyone out that they're not caught up, and so hopefully. And we'll certainly take feedback on any time on this of, we kind of hit the right stride now, I think, of, kind of doing the Wednesday show and the Sunday show, I think is working out for everyone. We've gotten, I feel like, really good feedback on all of that. It's not too much, and it's just enough to keep everyone hopefully entertained and everyone continuing to learn out there.
Yeah. We, I put a couple links in the show notes. These are all, sometimes we get some feedback from different parts of the industry. These really kind of are always reflections on our audience. We were, this one seems a little odd because we didn't cover a lot of Kubernetes. We were named one of the top 20 Kubernetes resources of 2022. I don't know if some of that's because we've done some other things around Kubernetes, but that, and then you and I were both named Who's Who of Cloud 2022, which is I guess, kind of cool, when your name's out there with people like Adrian Cockcroft and Werner Vogels and lots of other, Kelsey Hightower and other smart people. So that was kind of a nice recognition. I think a lot of that just comes from the fact that the show gets a lot of recognition and y'all are telling everybody about it. So the one other thing, I want to do one thank you and one apology, I guess. We need to apologize for covering crypto and Web3, I guess. Although they were some of the highest listens we had of the year, but boy, what a dud! What a collapse that has been the last year. And just sort of looking back on it, maybe we should have seen it more. I think we were kind of exploring it because we thought, okay, maybe there's some interesting technologies in here, and there still may be. We haven't completely given up hope on some of the Web3 stuff, but boy, oh boy, from where it was in January and February when we covered it to where it is now, holy cow.
Yeah.
That was fast.
Yeah. And it was amazing to me. I mean, I really liked the tech, and I've said before on the show, I really like the blockchain stuff in particular, and underneath all of that, I still find all of that super, super fascinating, but eventually I think it'll find its stride, and maybe it won't be crypto, and maybe it will be blockchain and Web3. I don't know, and I'm certainly, I'm not even making a prediction about it in the show this year.
Yeah. There you go. Well, the last thing we want to do in terms of thank yous is, we thank the audience a lot. We really need to thank our sponsors. We still love doing the show. They help make it possible for us to keep cranking them out all the time, give you good audio quality. And so just big thanks. Going to read through, obviously not everybody aligns to all the sponsors that we're with, and there's a lot of different options that are out there. But, if you get a chance, we really appreciate not only them, helping us with the show, but, we like to allow them to sort of have visibility to what they do to our audience. So, Datadog, Cloud Zero, Jump Cloud, Mergify, BMC, Teleport, New Relic, StrongDM, Polyscale, LoadForge, NetApp, Revelo, Lightstep, Granulate, CDN77, JetBrains, Eaton, CloudFix, and Fujifilm. So thank you to all of those good companies who, not only make really good products and really important products, but help us run the show every week. So big thanks to them. And if you get a chance to go out and check out their stuff and links in the show notes, they would always really appreciate it. So Aaron, why don't we wrap up there for the top of the show, and we'll jump back into what happened this year in 2022.
Sounds good. We will talk to everyone right after the break.
Storing data doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't have to be costly either. Tape provides you with a reliable way to store information that is 70 to 80% less expensive than cloud and disk storage. With a lower error rate than disk and longer-term storage capacity, Tape gives you control of your bottom line and security practices. As the largest manufacturer of magnetic storage tape in the world, Fujifilm is developing new ways to drive tape into the future. Discover why different companies across the globe are building their data strategies around tape at builtontape.fujifilmusa.com. That's builtontape.fujifilmusa.com. Today's show is brought to you by AWS Insiders, a new, edgy, entertaining podcast from CloudFix about the future of cloud computing on AWS. On every show, your hosts Hillary and Rahul not only bring on top industry guests, but they also debate the most contentious topics in the industry. It's a great back and forth, and every episode includes a really interesting AWS use case. We checked out AWS Insiders, and we were super impressed with not only the quality of the guests, but also the depth of experience on both sides of every discussion. Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to AWS Insiders for their support.
And we're back. And Brian, let's start off with the news before we get into the predictions. So 2022... lot of news going on, and some things change, some things stayed the same. There were certainly some big acquisitions. Public cloud continued to grow. Where do you even want to start?
I think maybe the way to start is sort of the bookends of the year. It felt like the year from an economic standpoint, and which obviously impacts tech, and tech impacts the economy. It started off on fire. I mean, we were having, unicorn announcements at the beginning of the year. We had, we were still sort of, dealing with sort of the end of the pandemic, and a lot of tech stocks were way up. And then, reality kind of kicked in. I want to say March, April, May timeframe. things, all of a sudden interest rates kind of jumped up. We saw some inflation jump up, and everything sort of hit the brakes. And it was, it was kind of gradual at first. It was like, whoa, what's going on here? And then, and then we got towards the sort of the Q3, Q4, we started to see some kind of big headline layoffs, not necessarily big number layoffs. I know, people talked about, there was, 100,000 plus layoffs in the tech industry, which sounds like a big thing. But, if you go back and look at the numbers in terms of hiring during the pandemic, I don't even know that we're back to sort of pre-pandemic numbers in terms of that. So, when you look at the number of people as a percentage of the workforce, it was still kind of a small number. It was, small single-digit percentages. And now we're ending the year with a lot of people going like, boy, there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know when the economy is going to kind of normalize again. I don't know, if spending's going to slow down. I don't know, those sort of things. So it was really interesting within the course of maybe 9 months, how we went from sort of the highest of highs to, I don't want to say like the lowest of lows, but what feels like just a very kind of uncertain time. People really aren't sure if they had to place a bet, like, is this thing going to last for 3 more months or 6 more months or 12 more months? You'd be hard pressed to find kind of a consensus of what that looks like.
Yeah. And the thing I'll add there is also, I think we're going to see, of course, the pandemic hit, and then we kind of saw a big work from home trend, and then people kind of hired around that. And I also think what we're starting to see is just, I think 2023 will be a little bit more around a stabilization of these new models. What is the economy going to look like going forward? What is the hiring models based off of that economy look like going forward? And even, where are they going to be? What is the working model going forward? And so I almost see a lot of this as a bit of right sizing in the industry. And I think we went through a dramatic shift in a very short amount of time. And so eventually everything will have to settle out. And I think we're kind of sort of getting towards the tail end of that. I'm not going to say it's over by any means, but I think we are starting to see the tail end of all of that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. It's, that's why we've done some shows over the last couple of months, essentially some Sunday Perspective shows, just on, there's probably a lot of people who've listened to the show. If you've been in the industry for, say less than 10 or 12 years, you probably haven't been through when things aren't booming. Maybe not in every single company, but just as an economy and a low interest rate. So we've been trying to kind of bring some people back some, partially some reality, but also just sort of like, history repeats itself. So, if you're newer to the industry or just newer in the last 10 plus years or so, those are probably worth listening to just to give you some perspective of, what happens in our industry. How does the industry react, especially tech, when things shift, when the winds change in our industry. And so, it's good to have some historical context because history has a tendency to repeat itself in our industry.
Agreed. I think the next big trend, let's talk about some of the acquisition and mergers.
Yeah.
There was a lot of them, right? And we're going to start with the biggest one because it's the most obvious one, VMware getting acquired by Broadcom. And may or may not get rolled in with CA and some of the others. And we had a lot of folks, when it was first announced, let's be honest, in our circles, it was not received well. A lot of folks either immediately started looking for a job or everyone was like, oh, this is the end of it. And, Broadcom's going to come in and change a lot of the operating models. And there's been various opinions of what VMware is going to look like going forward. And we've had Dave Valente on the podcast to talk about that. And actually, that was a really... y'all were very interested in that. That was probably one of the top shows of the year. And Dave had a great opinion on all of that and a great analysis with lots of data. And I think we're still playing all of that out. Now, I will say this. I think a lot of it is playing out a lot the way Dave said. And time will tell on that. We are seeing, I think just this week, some top VMware executives left the company. And so, there is still some things going on there that definitely we'll keep an eye on. The next one I would say was Citrix and Tibco. So Citrix, I have opinions, but also I need to be careful because, Citrix was one of my former employers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
I have mixed feelings about it. I feel like I'm pouring one out for Citrix, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it is it's whether it's Citrix or VMware or some of these companies, like, I think we're going to go through an era. I mean, not an era. We're going to go through a period of time here where, and most of these things are getting bought by, what looks like private equity, right? So Citrix and TIBCO merged, but essentially it was sort of, done because of private equity. Broadcom essentially runs what seems like a private equity business, even though it's still a public company. And I think it's one of those things where on the surface you look at it and you go, oh, it's too bad for those guys. Like, it feels like the end. But I think to a certain extent, it's a recognition that, like, they've still got very viable businesses. They're very cash flow centric businesses. They generate a lot of cash. They just, it's really hard to continue to be at the forefront of innovation all the time. And I think we're going to see some number of companies that kind of go through that. I mean, to a certain extent, we saw, kind of the pre-VMware stuff, whether it was like EMC kind of get snatched up and then Dell kind of put it into private equity, and, Puppet, Chef here recently, both of them went into private equity in the last year or so. And, so I think we'll see more and more of that. The hard part about that is, unfortunately, a lot of times in those instances, like, people, they end up cutting a lot of people. And so I guess the good news for the industry is a lot of good people that are at those companies are out on the street and available to pick up. But yeah, I think it's a trend that we'll see, just because it is really hard to shift from being, either a hardware company in particular, but even a kind of a mainstream enterprise software company into, kind of competing with the cloud. And so I don't know that these won't be, unique cases. I think we'll probably end up seeing more of them in 2023.
Yeah. And it's if you kind of study the models that are out there, I mean, this is the cash cow model coming to fruition, right? It's the end of the S curve, or it's the end of, the crossing the chasm, like, there's all these different models out there you can look at, and they all kind of end up with, at the tail end, hey, it's a cash cow. And what we're seeing is that in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we jump to some talk around hardware? I know we just sort of covered software. Why don't we talk a little bit about hardware? Because there was a couple of big sort of announcements that came out of it. We started the year. I think we were all super bullish on ARM. We were seeing ARM all over the place. We were seeing ARM in the M1 Max. We were seeing ARM get deployed a lot in the cloud. Graviton, stuff like that. And then NVIDIA made this bid to buy ARM, like a $50-60 billion acquisition. And surprisingly, it fell through. It got nixed by the EU, which I don't think the same thing will happen with VMware, but really, really surprising, because it was going to be a really interesting situation of, the biggest GPU vendor was now also going to be owning, what felt like what was becoming the new sort of Intel microprocessor. What would have been a really interesting sort of, I don't want to call it a monopoly, but boy, it would have been a really big boy in the hardware space.
Yeah. And I mean, the simplest way I look at this was, it would have been at that point a NVIDIA versus Intel world, right? Yeah. You would have had two super big chip companies just battling out against each other. And I was actually looking forward to it. I was a little surprised when it fell through. But also too, I was also a little surprised it was blocked in the way it was, because I was kind of thinking, well, there's always Intel, right? And Intel's certainly a big company too. And so I don't know, I had very, very mixed feelings about all of it, but it was one of those things that just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other big, sort of hardware specific thing was, Pat Gelsinger now back at Intel, left VMware, back at Intel. Boy, I tell you what, Pat did not rest on his laurels. This was a super busy year for Intel. Not only did they come in and sort of, completely redefine their strategy. They got into, they're going to get in the foundry business. They're going to, do partnerships with TSMC. They're doing much stuff. But, Pat made a really bold move, a really kind of strategic move. Maybe we'll look back on this and see, if it works out or not. But basically, went to the U.S. government and said, look, under the guise of so many chips now come from Taiwan and that part of the world, that region of the world, and they are critical to, sort of to the U.S. economy in essence, and made the case that, you can't afford to have, so many things dependent on chips from that part of the world. I think we saw some of it from, the shortages that happened with like used cars and stuff like that, or new cars during the pandemic. And he got this thing, called the CHIPS Act passed, which is, basically a ton of government subsidized fundings to start going back and doing chip manufacturing in the U.S., which, I think there's a lot of validity to, why that's probably a good idea for the U.S. to, because of the importance of chips for a lot of different things, whether it's cybersecurity or, the weapon systems and so forth. But boy, what an unbelievable coup by Intel to have that framework to put this subsidized funding around.
Yeah. And I'll kind of wrap up, the ARM thing as well as the Intel thing, kind of wrap it all together in kind of one example. So my work laptop is actually still an Intel Mac. It's one of the last ones. Mm-hmm. And this just goes to show you how far Intel fell behind. Yeah, it's a great laptop as long as it's plugged in. The second I unplug the sucker, it gives like maybe an hour and a half of battery life.
Wow.
I mean, the battery life on it is horrible. And so that's why Apple went off and did ARM. And this is why like NVIDIA went and, tried to purchase ARM. And this is why Google is doing their own chips. Like Intel really did, prior to Pat, fall behind.
Oh, yeah.
And they needed to make a big, bold move to catch up in the market because we were reaching a point where more and more it was becoming a world in which Intel's designs and their chip fabs and everything else was just falling behind in the market.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, if you don't subscribe to the Stratechery newsletter that Ben Thompson puts out, and then the associated podcasts, if you're interested in this space, he did such a good job this year of covering it. I mean, he's been covering the chip space for a while, amongst other things, but just did an awesome job this year of really, and it's not just sort of how he covers Intel, it's how he covers TSMC, it's how he covers sort of, where different, different generations of different chips are and how much, they can handle supply of like low end chips and high end chips. So if this is a space that's interesting to you, the Stratechery, newsletter and the podcast, I think it's like $100 a year. It is well worth your time. Not to mention you get access to a bunch of his other interesting podcasts these days. So not that we always want you to send you off to other podcasts, but Ben is really good. Highly recommend his stuff.
Yep.
What do you want to cover next?
Why don't we cover public cloud?
Okay. Something happened there?
Yeah. So, I mean, hey, all of the big ones continue to grow. Now, I will have to say this, because I'll throw one of my predictions. I'm going to throw myself under the bus. My prediction of GCP staying there in third, they did, and my prediction of Azure going to number one, they did not. But I will say this: the growth rates are pretty incredible. But also AWS starting to slow a little bit, right? 60 billion to 85 billion, so about a 28% year over year growth. Azure 35 billion to 50 billion, about a 42%. GCP 15 billion to 27 billion, about a 38%. So the number 2 and number 3 are still growing at really significant percentages. And now we're kind of like, AWS, they're only growing at 28%. But the numbers are getting big. It's getting harder and harder to continue to grow at the really significant, double-digit values that everyone is expecting, because the numbers are just getting so big. But the argument could also be made, though, again, depending on what keynote you listen to, like 10, 15, maybe 20% of workloads in the cloud, they're still 80, 90% of workloads are still on-prem. So there's still a lot of growth potentially in these markets. So what do you make of all of that?
Yeah, I think, like we said, first and foremost, amazing how fast these companies still continue to grow at those really large numbers. one of these days we'll go back and actually do the homework that we always say we're going to, which is like, let's go back and look at what, Microsoft looked like, early Microsoft or early Oracle looked like when they were growing, and they had gotten really, really big. But yeah, they're unbelievably impressive numbers. It still amazes me that the Google Cloud is still not profitable. At that sort of rate, it tells you how far behind they were and how much they're really working to sort of try and buy business. And, just especially given, what massive investments they have in the data centers, and maybe they just don't get to reuse so much of that stuff. But, I think it's going to be really interesting. We keep hearing it's the first inning, it's the second inning, it's 10%, it's 20% of the cloud. I think we're definitely into the era of, the moving to the cloud. The low hanging fruit of the cloud is definitely sort of been chewed up. I think it's emblematic that we're seeing AWS almost talk entirely about solutions in their keynotes at reInvent. Microsoft obviously has been doing solutions for a long time. We're seeing Google begin to make some really big investments. It was interesting when I was out at reInvent, I got to sit in a number of sort of like roundtables of people from a lot of different parts of the industry and so forth. And like a lot of them were talking about the, what is it called? The Mandiant acquisition that Google made, about a $5 billion acquisition back in March that we didn't really pay a lot of attention to back in the time, but really big acquisition by them, considering that, they made a $5 billion acquisition at the beginning of the year. They were doing $15 billion in revenue. So, it's a security oriented one. It was the guys who were behind figuring out that Cloudflare, not Cloudflare, the big SolarWinds hack. They were, huge in security around that space. So,
Sure.
A lot of talk at reInvent of these guys really being front and center of what GCP is going to focus on from a security perspective to go along with all the AI stuff. So a lot of interesting stuff there. Couple things I thought were really interesting in particular, because we've praised Satya Nadella a ton. Microsoft, even though, I don't know if we'll ever really know if what their revenues are. They actually might be number one for all we know, Aaron, at this point. They're so non-transparent about their numbers, but they are now at 50% of their businesses in the cloud and 50% still in software. And that's such an interesting thing to me because it shows how long it takes for large businesses, established businesses to shift their business model, and how much perseverance you've got to have, just sort of how much grit you've got to have to get from, hey, we're going to start doing, they did Bing and they did search and they did, obviously Office 365, but I mean, they've made some smart acquisitions, but I mean, LinkedIn only drives so much revenue, and things like GitHub only drive so much revenue. But it just shows that the Azure business continues to grow. Satya has figured out how to do that transition, which is pretty amazing. It's someday we're gonna see some really interesting books written about his tenure at Microsoft. We'll see something about the overall life of VMware. I think we're at an interesting stage with all those sort of big companies having actually either made the transition or didn't make the transition.
Yeah, and so and we also look at like AWS and Amazon versus AWS and what percentage of their revenue is AWS over the years, and then you look at Azure versus Microsoft and how much of that, and then But it also, when I bring up those, it also makes me, again, shake my head a little bit about GCP.
Yeah.
Because, again, GCP, I mean, for all intents and purposes, is a rounding error for Alphabet, right? Like, I mean, it's unfortunate to say that. And is that just because Alphabet and all of the Google ecosystem and services is just that big? Or is it like something is definitely off and still skewed? Now, I will say I still feel like even today, GCP like still doesn't have, I'll just use the term product market fit dialed in, right? Like you were talking about Adam shifting AWS more towards solutions. I think that's a perfect where they need to go next. And Azure and Satya and how they brought in Azure, like I thought that was perfect. I still don't quite understand GCP.
Well, yeah, it's always been a harder thing to understand. There's always the sort of, is it the right culture fit with the rest of Google? But I think on the bright side of it, it's like, they grew nearly as much as everybody else, just in terms of like pure percentage of growth. I mean, they almost doubled the business here in the last year. And I think if we're realistic, like if we went back realistically and said, hey, you're sitting in the keynote with Diane Green doing it those first couple of years, and you said, okay, do these guys have any chance of getting to, what's, looking like a $30 billion business, which might be a, $42, $45 billion business next year? Thomas Kurian has done a pretty darn good job, given what we know about the Google culture and sometimes their desire to give up on stuff that isn't the coolest thing in the world. I think Google, we always are going to a certain extent, misanalyze them just because they're so dominantly number one in everything else that they sort of care about, that it's just weird to watch them compete. And I think maybe that's the lens that maybe we kind of put them in, and we just don't know what to do with them in that case. Like,
it's a great point.
The only other place that I feel like we really think about them competing with anything is with Android. And Android, we don't really think of as being as good an experience as Apple, and they obviously don't make as much money as Apple does. But like, they have 70% market share, but it's through these third-party things. It's just hard to. I don't know. I think the hardest thing for me is I come back to like, I can't figure out why they're not making any money. Like I would love to see sort of the books of Google of like, why is everybody else making so much profitability and why aren't you guys? And I'm sure there's something there that if they showed it to you, you'd go, okay, that's what's going on. But I don't, and I hate to say it's like, oh, they're just trying to buy business. And so they got, ridiculous costs in certain areas, but it's just so weird to me, given how much I would think they'd be able to build on top of this massive data center infrastructure they have, which is probably a lot of their costs, but maybe it's just people in sales and marketing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Time will tell.
Yeah. Why don't we do this? Let's cover some of the other trends that we saw emerging this year, and then we'll save some time towards the end for kind of a review of last year's predictions, and then we'll go through some 2023 predictions.
Absolutely. Let's do it like a lightning round.
Yeah. So we are, so I feel like, and maybe I was out of the loop here for a little bit, but I feel like between ChatGPT and some of this, what is
like
it?
The
Lensa diffusion stuff with between text and images in like the last 2 weeks, I feel like it's all of a sudden it's like, whoa, AI made a humongous leap. And I know that we're totally, just being sort of ignorant because AI stuff takes forever. But boy, just the last couple of weeks, it's like, whew, that is cool. And it seems like it's easy to use.
Yep. Yeah. And like, so, and we'll be talking to Sam before too much longer, but Sam Charrington did the TOEML podcast. They actually interviewed like the Chat GPT, but they piped the transcription into another tool by another company that actually took the transcription and then turned it into a decent computer generated voice. And I've got some opinions on all of that, but yeah, it was like, you've got chat stuff going on, you've got voice stuff going on, you've got AI generated images everywhere. It really seems like it all hit, I don't want to say mainstream, but it hit to the point where we see it, and we're not in that part of the industry in depth, as well as other folks are out there. Oh, I got to try this tool, or have you tried this, or have you tried that? Like you start to see stuff posted on social media about it, and so it definitely. I feel like a lot of the stuff with AI was maybe not as approachable a lot of times. And so maybe this was just more of like, hey, some applications came out that were approachable to everyone.
Yeah. Well, I think it highlights the unbelievable importance and difficulty of getting user experience right. Those two things, Lensa and ChatGPT, and they're just examples of it. Like everybody can understand it. I mean, they're just like, I showed it to my kids and I was like, hey, here's this thing. Like you can write your essays for getting into college. And they were like, oh my God, this is going to be great. And, a bunch of stuff like that. I mean, I had salespeople at my company being like, this thing's going to start writing emails for me. And But yeah, no, I think I'll put it this way. So for folks that don't know Sam Charrington, he's been on the show a number of times, runs the great This Week in AI and ML podcast. He's going to be on one of the look ahead shows in January. Go stop our show right now. Go download his one he does with ChatGPT. Listen to the first 10 minutes of it. You're going to be blown away at like just what he put together. That in and of itself, and then he dives into the technology. But yeah, I'm super excited about what some of that means, and more so, like I'm super excited to think about like what could you potentially do with this stuff. And we'll dive into that with Sam in January. But kind of a teaser for what's coming next. Next one, a couple of them that I thought were interesting. Platform engineering seems to be, we can't figure out if it's replacing DevOps and SRE and some of those things, or if it's its own thing. Another teaser, we are going to cover some of that in a January show. But platform engineering, boy, it's starting to have its 15 minutes of fame here. It feels like in the last second half of the year.
Yeah. Now we just have to figure out when it's going to hit the trough of disillusionment, right?
That's right. That's right.
But I will say this though. I feel like there's something there, and what I mean by that is because it is, if you look at the kind of the definitions and the conversations that people are having about it, there is this idea of there's a common platform underneath a lot of the DevOps and SRE and a lot of GitOps and all these other things that's going on. There is a common infrastructure that needs to be maintained by somebody, and the devs don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So somebody's got to do the work. And so that seems to be, we just haven't come up with a good name. And hey, I mean, at least we're not calling it serverless, so everyone just throws up all over the name. I mean, at least has a decent name. So
yeah, it's words that people don't freak out about. They can debate. Hey, they can debate the definition of it as opposed to the words of it. That's always a good sign. We saw some folks who have chops and experience in doing PaaS, and maybe got PaaS right, maybe got PaaS wrong. Kind of coming back with a new iteration of PaaS. PaaS is the technology that the dream of PaaS will never die. It seems like WebAssembly, at least an instance of or an implementation of WebAssembly, is maybe starting to lurk around as, hey, maybe we're going to figure out PaaS and maybe solve some problems that we didn't get right with earlier PaaSes. So it was kind of exciting to see WebAssembly start to break out a little bit. We saw that at KubeCon in Detroit, and definitely something we'll be following more this year. And I'll say the last one I'll throw out there is kudos to the folks at Docker. Docker 2.0 making money, maybe making more money than Docker 1.0 did. But those folks, Scott Johnson and some of the folks that stuck around at Docker, congrats to them. They're starting to find their niche. They're not the gigantic unicorn that they were, but still providing value to people. So that's kind of cool and exciting.
Yeah, I and it's one of those too. Like, I don't know. I saw all the announcements and everything, and I mean, let's be honest, everyone's surprised. But that doesn't, like, I'm happily surprised. Like, I'm really, like, have been kind of cheering for them, and hey, they figured out a way to pull out of the dive, and we don't see that happen often in our industry.
Yeah. Well, and the crazy thing is, and we won't spend too much time on it, we'll have those guys on this year to tell us what happened. But, if you really go back and you think about the Docker stuff, the Docker experience was cool. Like it made containers consumable, and it was the right thing at the right time. But, there was this big part of Docker that was like, we are going to wade into the infrastructure wars. And I'm not sure they really knew what they were getting themselves up against, because all of a sudden the rest of the community, sort of the posse came after them, the Red Hats of the world, the VMwares of the world, the Core OSs of the world. But the thing that they really used to do really well, and they've kind of monetized again, was they were great at user experience, and they were really good at doing kind of integrated security around containers. And that's what the new Docker is. They basically went back to their core of like, what are the differentiated things we do? It's Docker Desktop, and it's a bunch of sort of integrations around Docker Desktop that are like security and stuff that people are like, ooh, that's valuable. It's not a commodity. It's not easy to replace. It's not easy to do. So, good for them for figuring out, in round two, what was their thing.
Agreed. Agreed.
All right, man. It's time for predictions. Do you want to go back and review any of the 22 predictions at all? Should we do some shaming? Is it the time for Festivus and airing of grievances?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. And so here's the other thing too, though. And I said it before we hit record. I feel like the predictions last year were a little weak.
They were. I think we phoned them in a little bit. Let's
call it what it is. I feel like we went a little easy on ourselves last year. So I think we need to go big this year. Right. But here, I'll cover mine real quick. So I said, was talking about zero trust security models, and that'll become dominant. And that was kind of a no brainer. I give myself a C on that one at best.
Yeah.
And then I decided, I was like, hey, Microsoft's going to be will be the top public cloud. AWS will fall to number 2. That didn't happen. But hey, everyone's still growing, and Azure is growing the greatest. So you know what? I might bring that one forward. And Google, I said, is going to settle into 3rd or even 4th or 5th. And actually, I'm going to take that one back and say, okay, yeah, they're solidly 3rd. And if they get their shit together, hey, they may make it to 2 someday. But I don't see another big one. Maybe like an Alibaba or somebody like that. But I don't see OCI or any of these others ever displacing Google for 3rd anymore. Yeah,
mine were the first one was, I don't even know if it was a prediction. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, that was terrible. It was Google decides if they think so. Let me put this in context. So a number of years back, I don't remember if it was Sundar Pichai or if it was Larry and Sergey basically said, if you GCP guys don't get to number 2 by 2023, we're shutting it down. And whether or not that was actually said or not, it somehow kind of leaked out in the press. And so this was, and again, it was 3 or 4, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And so it was okay, we're gonna do the carrot and the stick. We're gonna put this big goal out in front of you. And I was kind of predicting next year, maybe they're gonna make do on this thing, and it's not working out. I think they've kind of gotten past that. I would be really interested to see if any of those discussions still go on, but that's a hard business to walk away from, even though in the big picture of Google, it's still not that big. But I think that I'll take that as an L. And then the other one was, and I think this was sort of a knee-jerk reaction to some of the things that were in the reInvent keynote. I said that we're going to start seeing a bunch of ex-AWS people, like product managers and so forth, start their own companies. Because I think there was 1 or 2 that had been in the Adam Selipsky first keynote, and I don't think that really happened. I don't think we saw a lot of that. I think of the people that reach out to us, it still feels like, of all the 3 cloud providers that have people leaving to go do their own thing, it still feels like a large percentage of them have some sort of Google background because they're in data of some sort, or they're going to try and do something out of Google. So I don't know if that's true, but it just feels like visibility wise, the ex-Googlers are more visible than maybe the ex-AWS people. Yeah,
and I'll add this. I feel like when we talk to folks, it's a lot of ex-Facebook people and a lot of ex-Google people. I don't know if that's just because of the industry we're in, and a lot of those folks do distributed systems and kind of famously did some pretty massive distributed systems there, and then, decided to go off and do their own thing. But yeah, I agree. I don't really feel like we get a lot of ex-AWS people necessarily.
Yep. All right. You want to go first?
Sure. Absolutely. So I'm going to start off with a softball one, and I admit it. We are going to see a Twitter clone that's going to be founded by the folks that left. A bunch of the key engineers.
Not the folks on the left, but the people that left Twitter.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And they're, I'm sure there's VCs knocking on doors already, right? Because let's be honest, there's a lot of people that left Twitter. And if you believe it, there's a lot of good talent out there. And I really do believe somebody is going to go make a Twitter clone. Now, honestly, though, if I was a VC and I'm putting money into something like that, great. It sounds like you can do the tech. Like, we've already done that. How are you going to make money on it?
Yeah, I feel like there's a motivation to do it. We've said before that Twitter in and of itself is a bad business, so I don't know if somebody will necessarily do it unless they're willing to be like, it's sort of the combination of like, it's a nice business, and it's a public good, and you kind of want to be seen as a hero. I feel like there's two problems with whoever's going to clone Twitter, right? The first one is, and maybe this is what they're hoping for. Like, if the thing goes into bankruptcy, or Elon bails out of it or something, I feel like in order to do a clone of Twitter, there needs to be a really simple way to go, give me all my followers, not necessarily my followers, but who I follow automatically moved over there. And you can't do that like with Mastodon or anything. Like there's just not an easy way to do that, because those people might not exist over there, or they may have a different name or whatever it is. Like, if I can't just get the same, if I have to start over, like when I go to Mastodon, it is the boringest thing in the world, because it's all the people that are just in the tech industry. And to me, that's the least interesting part of Twitter. But the other piece of it, I think, I lost my train of thought. I think that's the hardest part of it. And then the other part of it, and this is what it was. I remember my thing. I feel like there's people who think the value of Twitter is like as a micro blogging thing. I've seen a number of people. There's a new company called Post, which is doing a thing that people out in the Valley are kind of excited about, but they're framing it as like, oh, it's the new micro blogging platform. And I'm like, I know that's what Twitter was originally kind of considered as, but like, I don't consider it at all a blog. I feel like it's an information hose that just happens to have blogs in it. And I've seen a number of people, our friend Matthew Broberg was like, oh, I finally figured out Mastodon as a micro blogging thing. And I'm like, I don't think that's what people get interesting value out of. I mean, if you're looking for a place to write, the internet's never lacked a number of places to write, but I just feel like it's the real-time nature, sort of community nature of Twitter. And if you can't recreate that, I don't know, I don't know how it works out. But I don't mean to shit all over your prediction. Apologies for my French.
No.
I just think there's a couple of really hard things that people aren't looking at and going, I can recreate some other thing.
Well, here's the thing. Like, and I actually like this analysis of it. I've heard Twitter referred to as, the town square. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, it's an information fire hose. It's maybe a little bit of a microblogging platform, but for me, like, why did I use it? I absolutely, it was the combination of a news feed and the town square philosophy.
And if you completely dropped off, is that right?
Yeah, I'm off. I don't do it at all anymore. A couple weeks ago, I was like, I'm out. Fuck this. So yeah, I'm completely off of it. But to your point, Mastodon, I went over there. It's fine. I don't know. Mastodon just isn't grabbing me. And I'm actually going to probably do a Sunday show coming up at some point of like, okay, I've spent a lot of time here recently of like, okay, how can I go get that information fire hose kind of aspect of it? Because I mean, we need that for the podcast. Like, how do we stay on top of things? So I feel like I've pretty successfully been able to get around that. And like I said, I'm actually going to do a whole show on it at some point.
Oh, breaking news. Aaron's going to do a Sunday perspective.
I know. I'm going to actually probably do one before, maybe we'll see that, or maybe you'll see a new webpage. I don't know. But for those that are new to the podcast, I've been promising a webpage for about 10 of our 12 years, and we still don't have it. But here's the thing, going back to the town square concept, I don't see anything out there that replaces the town square concept. No. And going back to my original thing, I don't see anybody, even Twitter, that successfully monetized the town square concept. And that's the probably root problem here.
Right. Yep. Well, I mean, maybe it's just as simple as they just have to have a full-time CEO as opposed to somebody who runs 4 other businesses. Maybe it's just as simple as that. Mm-hmm. All right. My first one, I think we will see. So obviously we've seen lots and lots of unicorns announced in 2020 to 2022. Lots of funding flew into the industry, lots of unicorns, lots of, 5-acorns and 10-acorns and whatever they're called. I think we're going to start seeing a bunch of these companies get bought up. Depending on when they took their last round of funding, getting that next round is going to be increasingly harder. I think, we're going to see some valuations that are dropping, or people who are, like, I'm willing to get out. I think we're going to see a bunch of buying up in 2023. It's going to be hard to raise funds. There's a lot of interesting tech that's floating around, and it's a good opportunity. to fill in, especially if they see opportunities where companies are going to, generate cash flow. They're like, they align well to what they do. Their sales force can quickly pick them up and run with them. I think we're going to see a bunch of those. And I think you actually are predicting the opposite.
Well, actually, I'm predicting the same, but I'm going to say this. 2023, I think, is going to be the year of down rounds.
Okay. So you think they'll take rounds of funding?
Yeah, I think they'll take rounds of funding, but I think you're going to see valuations go down. You look at like Sneak. Sneak just took a round and they devalued by about 12%. And they took like another 200 million or thereabouts. But I mean, you look at that company at that point had taken, it's like 1.3 billion they've taken so far.
Right.
And so like they're probably close to decacorn status, but they're not quite there yet. But I mean, I did a quick Google search. As of June of this year, there's 450 unicorns and 24 decacorns. So decacorn is 10 billion or more valuation in the world. That is really significant. I've been kind of making joke on Cloud News lately, like everyone's a unicorn these days. I mean, 450 unicorns is a lot of unicorns, and like over half of them are in the United States. And so I don't see that as something that can continue. So I think your prediction is absolutely spot on. And I think there's going to be a lot of down rounds this year. And I'm actually going to take it one step further and say, I actually think a unicorn is going to go under in 2023. I don't know exactly how and when something like that is going to happen, but I feel like, my predictions weren't bold enough last year. So I'm actually going to take it one step further and say a unicorn will go under.
Wow. All right.
I've got him to be clear. Like, I don't want it.
We don't wish ill upon anybody, at least. Yeah. There's a lot of good people out there. We don't wish ill upon anybody just for, mismanaging their funds, which they shouldn't have mismanaged. Mm-hmm. I've got two that are sort of money related. I think they're sort of on either side of money or economics. I think we're going to see serverless make a comeback. I feel like it was hot for a while and then it kind of went away. I feel like we're going to see serverless make a comeback because people are going to be looking for cheaper, more easy to identify the cost of compute type of thing. So, serverless was a buzz, and then it kind of faded away because people were like, "Oh, it's not as easy. I can't lift and shift stuff to there." But I think we will start seeing kind of a rebirth of serverless as a less about a no-ops technology and more about a cost efficiency technology. But I think serverless is still going to be somewhat niche as it's been for a while. I think we're going to see, and I don't know which one it'll be, but I think we're going to see some sort of FinOps conference. I don't know if it'll be a breakout or a spin out of one of the CNCF events or something, but I think there's going to be a FinOps conference at some point in time that just becomes the must attend event of the year, just given on the number of companies that are trying to do FinOps, cost management, the number of companies that call us about either wanting to be on the show, sponsor the show. I think how do I save money on my cloud bill? It was nice to have when the things were booming and money was cheap. It will be a must attend show wherever it will be. Hopefully it's somewhere in Vegas that is like, glitzy and glamorous and doesn't care about money. But I think that's where it's good. I think we're going to see that.
Yeah. Well, all I have to say is for the FinOps conference, I hope it's anywhere but Detroit. No offense to Detroit. So I'll add this to yours. So for the serverless, first of all, I agree. Here's the thing. I think the event-driven architectures they keep maturing, they keep advancing, and they keep finding really good use cases. And so I'm going to take it a step further and say I think serverless kind of will really find its spot within the event-driven architectures, and that gets wrapped into FinOps, right? Because this becomes a really good way to do event-driven architectures in the most financially viable model possible. I think this could very easily be a prevailing architecture as we start to see cost consciousness in the economy in 2023. So I could see that being something that it absolutely becomes top of mind because everyone is going to be about right-sizing their environments, making sure they're not overspending, making sure they're, have just enough capacity, but not too much capacity. I mean, I think this trend will continue. And by the way, I think once this happens, if we can get it mature enough, fast enough, I do potentially think it's the new way going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. What's next on your list?
So I'm going to actually say this, going back to the Docker one, and actually this goes back into the unicorn ones. I'm going to say Docker is going to have not just making money, but breakout year. Like, I think Docker will become a unicorn again. And I think they're going to prove everyone wrong. Now, let's, again, you were talking about earlier. I feel like one of the most things they've monetized is Docker Desktop. Like, that's a lot of desktops to get to $1 billion valuation. So, I mean, and I'm half joking when I say that, but I mean, I really do think everyone is going to really like that story. And I do think they will probably be, because of their history, be better able to get funding even in a potentially more difficult environment in 2023. So I'm rooting for them, and they're going to be my one to watch in 2023.
Yeah. It would be interesting to see, like, it would be really interesting because I can't think, having done this show for a long time, I can't think of any company that went unicorn. I guess what would they be? They were like a 3x corn or whatever. So they're, so tricycle corn to almost what felt like they were going to go bankrupt. If they could become a unicorn again, even just a single corn, that would be an amazing story. And maybe one of the most interesting stories we've ever covered in this one. To me, it would be really interesting if Apple bought them and figured out, because especially if it's around the desktop technology, most developers are using Macs. If they could figure out some way between, the chipsets that are on there, maybe some localized security thing that they were doing, software supply chain sort of story, like, it would be an interesting integration. And obviously, Apple has the money to make some sort of investment, or acquisition like that. Otherwise, it kind of goes back to that old thing of, like, I don't know who would buy them. I feel like it's either Apple or Microsoft. And, maybe, boy, that would be another crazy thing, because they turned down the Microsoft money before, but to take it the second time.
Well, and here's the other thing.
Lots of twists and turns there.
Yeah. And I want to bring back the Docker drinking game. For those that don't know, we had a drinking game on this show around Docker, and there was times you would drink during keynotes, and I want to bring that back. That's another reason.
Every time Docker was, Aaron wants 2023 to be getting drunk at keynotes again. I'm here for it, man. I hear you. I think my next one on my list, I think GCP. So we talked about the Mandiant acquisition, $5 billion. I think they make another gigantic acquisition. I don't necessarily know which one it would be. For a while, that people would talk about, like, Salesforce and other stuff. But, like, I think there's another, big, I'll call it Hail Mary, but Hail Mary seems like it's sort of the end of the game thing. But I feel like they have, at least one more thing that Thomas Kurian can get away with to see if they can prove they can get them over the hump. Get them maybe not to number 2, because it's a big leap, but get them to, like, 2.5. Right, get them in shouting distance of the top 2. I think they make some sort of big acquisition, and I don't know which one it'll be, but I think they go down that path, because I think some of these, and maybe they go down the path of a bunch of them, because I think the level of spending is going to be lower in 2020. The cost of it is lower in 2023. So maybe they go on a run this year.
I agree. No, I think it's a fantastic prediction. I have nothing to add because I completely agree.
All right. You got one more and I'll do one more?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one, actually, this is more a little bit tongue in cheek, but also it's more of a consumer tech prediction. It's a very poorly kept secret. Apple has been working on an EV car for some time now, which I still can't wrap my head around, the fact that Apple might make cars. But I mean, you kind of look at everything that's been going on with Twitter and Elon and Tesla, and Elon famously had to visit the Apple campus and met with Tim Cook, and there was some kind of stuff there, and I could see Tim Cook coming out of that meeting and going, you know what, it's time to go bring out that car.
Bring out the hammer. Well, I mean, I tell you what a gangster move that would be. I mean, he's already knocked off what was it, like $10 billion in market valuation of Facebook because of that ads thing that they do on the iPhone now. He's taken valuation off of Google. I mean, if he could take a huge valuation off, the biggest, I guess, I don't know if he's still the richest guy in the world.
He's second now. Yeah.
Boy, what a legacy, what a legacy that would be.
I could just see, like, he walks out of the room and goes, "Okay, look, son."
They're shaking hands to leave, and he goes, "Hey, one more thing." He does the famous, "Hey, one more thing," and he hands him either like a garage door opener that opens a garage to it, or just like the keys, the key fob, and he's like, "Yep. I'll see you soon." That kind of thing. Yeah, yes. That would be kind of crazy. Well, I had one more. You know what? I feel like I'm gonna leave it on the cutting room floor because I think yours might be too good to try and top. So, well, listen, this was a great wrap up. How long have we gone now?
Oh, we're at almost an hour.
Okay. All right. Well, this is about what we expected. It's long winded. We've gone for a while. There will be, I think we've got a couple more Sunday Perspective shows. I got to come up with some topics. They're going to be kind of fun and just short. And then we're doing one more show. You and I are doing one more show. We're going to record it this week. It'll probably drop on Christmas. We're not doing that on purpose. It just happens to be that Christmas, I think, is on Wednesday this year. And we are going to kind of do a big giant mailbag of questions that you all have sent us over the year, questions that people have asked us as we've been out at events this year. So it's going to be a lot of stuff. It'll be kind of fun. There's some really, really good questions in there, and that'll be the last show for the year. This will be the second to last sort of Wednesday show, and then that'll be the last show. So any last thoughts for wrapping up the year, man?
No, if folks are still with us, I just want to say again, thank you. I mean, it's been amazing. During the pandemic, we were a little bit, I completely admit, like the podcast listens dropped off, and we were like, oh shit, like what's going to happen with the podcast? And we've worked pretty hard to try and get everything back. And I completely admit, like, we're just shocked at times at the response this year. And so huge thanks to everyone for that. And please reach out to us. If you have ideas for shows or topics or guests, we're always on the lookout. As I think, Brian mentioned, I mean, we do 100 shows a year at this point now. So, hey, help us when it comes to scheduling stuff. We would love to continue to learn from you as well out there in the community. And so with that, I'm going to close us out and say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays to everyone out there. And of course, if you like the show, tell a friend, leave us a review.
Leave us a 5-star review. Don't just leave us any review.
Exactly,
be nice.
Exactly. Yeah.
Don't leave us cold. Don't leave us cold.
Exactly. Be nice. So with that, we're going to close it out for this week, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.